Be Frank Network. Content on this production is for entertainment and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, nor is it intended to substitute medical treatment or diagnosis. Seek medical help if you believe that you are suffering from a mental illness or are a threat to yourself or others. By using any or all of the information provided, you do so at your own risk. Any application of the material is at the listener's discretion and is his or her sole responsibility.
Everybody, Doc Brian here, and welcome to Doc Talks. We talk about people's troubles, trials, tribulations, and triumphs in life. Today with me, I have David and Stacy. Is that Howell?
Howell, yes.
That's the way you say it. And we're going to talk today a little bit about something that's near and dear to my heart. As many of our listeners know, my wife and I adopted our son, and David and Stacy have embarked on this journey and been through it right along with us. So we're glad to have you here today to tell your story.
Oh, we're glad to be here.
So you have, I think we talked about, you have a total of 6 children. Is that right?
Yes.
But they're not all adopted.
No, we have 3 biological children between the ages of 13 and 18. And then we have the 3 adopted daughters, the twin 6-year-olds and a 5-year-old.
Okay. So what made you want to adopt?
Adoption was actually something we talked about before we were even married. David is adopted by his stepfather, and that made such a huge impact on his life. And that was something that we had talked about and just kind of felt like God had laid on our heart before our marriage even began. So from time to time, over the first 10 years, we kind of revisited that idea and decided that when our youngest of our oldest 3 was around 7 or 8 years old, then maybe we would revisit it again. And at that time we did, and we felt like it was the right time to move forward with that, because we wanted our older children to be a part of the process, and to understand what we were doing and why we were doing it.
If I recall part of your story, you went and you had planned on adopting one boy.
Yes. So the thought process, we had 2 daughters and 1 son, and we just said we were going to, try and adopt a little boy between the ages of 4 and 6 years old, so he'd still be younger than our youngest. And through the process, we came out with 3 beautiful little girls, all under the age of 2. So our son, who's 15 now, I think he may have trust issues with me and Stacy throughout the years, but he loves them just as much.
So you ended up with 5 girls and 1 boy.
That's
Yes.
right.
What a household. What a household.
Is.
There's a lot of estrogen flowing in there,
Severely
David.
outnumbered. Now I have 3 sisters, so I grew up outnumbered, so I'm kind of used to it.
Yeah. So you said you kind of, with David's story of being adopted, that kind of really impacted you to adopt. And we know statistically in the United States, there's about 400,000 kids in foster care at any given moment. And so there's this incredible need for foster parents and adoptive parents. And so what was that process like to even get started to be able to be considered to adopt?
Well, originally we had always thought we would adopt from overseas. And then I had a client I was photographing. I'm a photographer. And she happened to be a foster mom and had some new placements in her home. And that's really who I learned that there were kids in our own state that were up for adoption that lived in the foster care system because they had no home. That's what got us into adopting through foster care to begin with. And it always amazes me that even right now, there's almost 400 kids in Arkansas alone that are up for adoption.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like adoptions happen very quickly.
Well,
Absolutely not.
no, and going into it, one of my fears was we need to prepare financially. And the fear, when we looked at overseas adoption, but then when we got in and started researching, wonderful organizations such as The Call and working with foster care and adoption, for our 3 daughters, our only cost was the cost of a birth certificate.
Right.
So, it is
like
free.
$12.50.
Yeah, it was nothing. So that's one of the biggest obstacles that I hear from people that ask me about adoption is, financially, how could you afford to adopt 3 girls? I'm like, there was no charge.
Right.
I mean, we were lucky.
Yeah, and I have my wife's cousin. They have adopted 2 children from overseas, and it's been like $50,000-$60,000 to adopt a child. But it seems to be a lot easier to do international adoption than it does here in the States.
Yeah, and there's nothing. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with it, and that has its own niche and need, and I'm excited for the families that are able to do it. But for us, that was a big obstacle that we were looking at that was no longer there.
Right.
When we got into it.
So, as I said, my son is adopted. And so when we started all that paperwork, you may remember there was this form that was a yes, no, or we'll discuss. And it talked about everything from race to gender to whether or not they had been born dependent on a drug or had fetal alcohol syndrome or mental health issues, depending on the child. And it's like a 5 or 6 page form. And when you begin, I can tell you from my experience, when I begin reading these things, I'm going, surely a child hasn't been through this. Can't be this. And so when we got to looking at it, well, there was a very narrow thing of what we were willing to say, okay, we will do this, but not this. How did that affect both of you?
I don't think that had too much impact on us personally. Having already had 3 kids, we kind of know that every kid is completely different. Every kid has their own needs and it's going to be different from their brother or sister. You get that form, but you're also going through these like 70 hours or something of what they call pride classes, where you're learning about trauma and maybe some of these things these kids have been through. And you also get a sheet, and it talks about what they call ACEs, which are like boxes you can check off. And it kind of, the more boxes you check off, the more trauma, would be in your life. And as we were going through those, it kind of brought back up even things from my own life that I had kind of blocked out. And so, not having like the childhood myself, like it maybe that's the reason it didn't have such a big impact on us or didn't scare us or shock us reading some of those things. We pretty much left ours mostly open, like we'll discuss. We were told like some of those things like hearing impaired, well, maybe they just need a hearing aid or, maybe they wear eyeglasses or, things like that. So we try to leave it very, very open.
But then there are things on there that are very terminal in some cases, such as cerebral palsy, or they have muscular dystrophy, or they have HIV or AIDS or some other type of infectious disease. And so it really, at least for us, my wife is a nurse and I do what I do. So we're kind of exposed to that already. But I hate to say it, but we really didn't want to just bring that into our home. I hope that's not a bad thing to say at all. But, even in our own home, we still got to be protective of those things. And I couldn't imagine having already 3 kids in the home of your own biologically and having this possibility enter into the picture.
Well, one thing we said from the start was that we weren't within our control. We weren't going to let any of our older children ever be able to say that adopting and expanding our family, and they were all on board 100%, that it ever had any impact in a negative way on their childhood. So it may mean one of us going off by ourselves to go do this event or that, or it may mean dragging, 3 toddlers and strollers to the football games. But we still made sure that happened. But yeah, I understand completely what you're saying, because it does. One thing that sometimes we forget is it impacts everybody, and it impacts your immediate family. And just because you feel called to adopt as a couple doesn't necessarily mean that your siblings feel called to you being the adoptee. And so, it impacts everybody. And so you can't really expect everybody to immediately be on board just because you feel like that's the path that God's told you to do. And
Right.
so,
Yeah. In our situation, I'm not going to tell you it was my in-laws, but we had family that was completely against it and was very angry that we were even considering it. And I'm going, look, we want to have a child. We can't have children. What else are we going to do? And there is those cases where, which your girls were 2 when you adopted them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There are those cases where at 2 years old, there could be mental health issues that aren't even apparent that could turn into major detriments as they get older. And I think that a lot of times we have to look at those things and say, okay, is this the right thing? Is this the wrong thing? And that's where we rely on our faith to guide us there. But in your situation, you said you were looking for a boy, but you ended up with 3 girls.
yes.
So how did that happen?
Every adoption story is different, and ours for sure definitely is different than everyone else's. So we have been where we were. This has been, 5-6 years ago at this point. We were very vocal on social media about what we were doing and why we were doing it. And that was mainly to bring more awareness to the need of adopting out of foster care in our state, and just opening people's eyes that this exists, because it's kind of like a different world that I had no idea even existed before we started. When our home was finally completely open, we had originally signed up to do adoption only, and I had posted on Facebook that our home was open and all of our paperwork was done. And almost immediately, I had a friend from high school who I hadn't spoken to in several years send us a Facebook message. And she had been fostering our twins for about a year. They went into foster care as infants, and they were her great nieces. She wondered if maybe, we would be interested in taking them. And because she had been told by their caseworker that, it was headed towards adoption, and she wanted to be in their life, but she did not want to be their, didn't feel called to be their mother. And so that's kind of where that started. And then we found out that they had a baby sister. Yeah, it just kind of went from there. I mean, she sent us a picture, and we looked at the picture, and all 5 of us in our household, I mean, our hearts just melted. Like we just saw those girls, and there was no way we could say no.
It really wasn't fair that we got the picture first. Yeah.
I mean, you always hear about love at first sight for like your husband or your wife, but I mean, for those twins, I mean, it was definitely love at first sight.
Yeah, we did not get a picture of my son. We the day we got him was the first day we'd ever seen him. And now in the state of Arkansas, and it may have been different if for you, but for us, he was allowed to come to our house the first day for like 12 hours. Mm-hmm. And then he went back to his foster home for one night, and then he was with us permanently. And that kind of gives you a little idea of what life will be like during that first day, which is completely awkward. Did you experience that as well?
No. So thankfully, we already had 3 kids. So, parenting was not new to us by any means. However, parenting multiples definitely is a completely different ballgame. So they were in about 3 hours away. They were picked up from daycare and driven across the state. And
car broke down.
The DHS car broke down. They were on the side of the road for a while, and eventually they made their way to up towards the northern Arkansas where we live, and we picked them up, and that was it.
And funny thing about that, so they came to us about a month apart. So our youngest came to us. We drove to Starbucks in Benton, and on the way there realized that we need to get a gift for this sweet little 7-month-old baby. And so we go into Target, we look around, we realize that we're the old couple in Target. And we feel completely lost and whatnot. But we met the DHS worker at Starbucks, and that's where we picked up our youngest. And so every year on her gotcha day, which was actually yesterday, Stacy and her go to Starbucks. And so the family tries to go as well. But when the twins came, Stacy met them, picked them up, and then brought them actually to a swim meet. And so where we were at with the older kids. So from the start, they've been thrown into it.
Yeah. How was that, which you said you saw the picture and it just kind of, they melted into your heart. What was the feeling there? Because there had to also be some feeling of maybe hesitancy or anxiety, or was it just you knew this is what we were going to do?
I knew it was what I wanted to do.
And for me, I was always able to go back that I knew that in prayer that's what I'd felt like the Lord had told me we were going to do. So I always had that to go back to. You have to feel called to do something. And so parenting's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
But yeah, we always knew, we never doubted that was perhaps a mistake. Other people looked at us like we were crazy. It made no sense, but we always had that to go back to.
Now, did you know at that point in time that you took them into custody or into your home why they were taken into custody? Why they had been removed from the home?
We did.
Could you share a little bit about that with us?
Maybe a little bit.
Okay.
We try to tell our story and not our kid's story or, their biological mom's story, too much of it. They were removed from the home, like most kids in Arkansas. Over 90% of the kids are removed for drug usage and addiction. So.
Okay. And so in the state of Arkansas, at any given time, you will find kids in the DHS office or a police department that are staying overnight because they don't have foster homes to go to.
Especially right now.
Yes. It's just absolutely crazy. You said you originally set up for adoption. Was there a point in time where you wanted to foster or that was an idea?
That was never something that we had truly thought we would do. However, walking into this whole journey, our thing has just been saying yes to God. And we know better. We've been married 20 years next month. And, the first 5 years, you make all the plans you want. And then, God always rips it out from underneath you because, his plans are better. And so we learned pretty early on not to make definite plans in any part of our life, but just being willing to say yes when God calls us to do something without having to have it mapped out.
Right. And for my wife and I, we couldn't foster because we know that we couldn't send that kid back into a situation that could possibly be like why they were taken originally, and to fall in love with that child and then to have to send them home. It takes a very special person who is able to do that. So with your kids coming out of, I guess, a kinship placement, how did life change for them at that point coming into your home?
Well, they were in a home. They were very loved by their aunt, but she had recently gotten remarried, was kind of in a new journey of her own life and started a new job, and her husband worked a full-time job. So they were basically, early to late pickup daycare, babies. And so moving in with us, they spent more time like in the home. They did need some therapies. We were able to get them in the right doctor's offices at the right time to kind of get some of those things started and get them on some paths to catching up where they needed to be.
Yes, the 2-3-year-old time frame is very imperative when you begin to talking about development and growth and all of those kind of issues. So that is something that they really need to be on top of.
Yes.
But it does seem like the department, the DCFS, I lost my train of thought there. It does seem like they are so overworked that a lot of times those things are missed out.
Oh, definitely. We thought that once our house was opened for adoption, I was like, all right, they're going to call tonight and they're going to have a child and it's going to be go time. And what we found out over the next couple of weeks was there was really, as overworked as they are, there was really no advocate for these kids. And so we really, that was probably the biggest misconception that I had going into it, was that we would, get contacted immediately. And I talked to people pretty regularly. They're like, yeah, I never received that communication. So now one thing though, on our 3 children, even though they were all siblings, the youngest was born after the the twins had already been moved into foster care. So when they came to us was the first time that the three sisters had ever actually lived together. And so,
Oh, I forgot about that.
yeah, so they really didn't. I think they probably had seen each other, but as far as being siblings, and at 7 months and 2 years, you really don't have that bond. But that's the pretty cool thing was that was the first time they all got united in one home.
Yeah, I remember, and one thing on that sheet you fill out is the age of a child that you're willing to take, and we really felt like it would be 2 years and younger that we would be willing to consider. And I remember the caseworker looking at us and saying, "Well, you may have to wait 5 or 6 years." And I'm going, so what was the rush to get us approved and to get us through all of this? And I know people right now who have been open for adoption for 5, 6, 7 years that have never received a phone call. And is it really truly because of their preference, or is it because of the workers being overworked?
Well, I've actually talked to someone about that. I'm trying to get some changes going on over the years. So what I've come to learn, and what they don't tell you when you're going through the classes, is that you have adoption specialists. But what they don't tell you about the adoption specialists is that they only work for the kids. So you have adoption specialists who are assigned to kids who are up for adoption, and they try to seek out a parent for that child. But what they don't have, what doesn't exist, is someone who advocates for the parents who are wanting to adopt. So you have no one that takes this list of these, probably close to 100, I would assume, parents that are wanting to adopt, whose home is ready, all their paperwork's done. There's no one who goes in and searches through the kid database to find someone who matches with the parents. And I feel like if they had someone doing that side of the job, along with someone doing the other side of the job, that maybe we could match some more of these kids up a little quicker, or a little, on a better, more regular basis.
Right. And I think, with programs such as Project Zero here in Arkansas, that they have kind of opened that thought process and having these events where the kids who are available for adoption are there and, adopt. Do you not know about this?
We went to one.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we went to one too, and it was like the most awkward
Awkward.
thing
Oh, my
I had
word.
ever been
Gosh,
to.
that's why I looked at her like that. We walked away from that. I was like, I feel so creepy.
Mhm.
It was. We went away, and I don't know if you've seen the movie. What was the movie?
Instant Family.
Instant
Yes,
Family?
yes.
Okay, they nailed it. I
Mhm.
mean, that scene
Very
there, when we
true.
watched that movie, I'm watching, it's just every raw emotion that I hadn't felt since that
Absolutely.
day. It was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, Project Zero, amazing ministry, mission. I love what they do. But yeah, my takeaway from that event was, Lord, I cannot go back to that again.
Yeah, because it almost, in a literal way, feels like you're shopping for a child.
Exactly.
Yes. And I mean, there was one instance where I was sitting there, and they're like, just go in there. And, kids are digging around the sandbox, and these strange men walk up and are like, hey, kid, what's going on? I mean, you're really...
And
It's
everything we've been
creepy.
taught about not talking
Yeah,
to
stranger
strangers
danger.
is
We're-
being encouraged.
Exactly. And so, but there's this little boy, I'll never forget. I was sitting there, just sitting on the curb, talking to this little 4-year-old boy, just adorable little kid. And a lady literally walks up and picks this kid up. He doesn't even know who she is. She picks him up and spins him around and hands him to another couple. It's like, here's the kid I wanted you to meet. And so this kid was eating ice cream with me, and she snatches him up and takes him to her friends, and it was just completely awkward.
And we wonder why a lot of these kids that have been in these situations don't have stranger danger.
Yeah, don't have boundaries, and
Sure.
exactly. So yeah,
I mean, it's a good idea on the surface, but in action, it just doesn't really work out.
it's brilliant.
Yeah. So what would the solution to that problem really be?
I think for me, exactly what Stacy was talking about would be an advocate that could go through and work the active list of people that are willing. Because like you said, you have this long sheet that you fill out of what you would be willing to welcome into your home. But it might be something as minute as, on the sheet you checked, no to a child with, vision problems. Well, that could be just no to a child that has to wear glasses. And so somebody that could actively, an organization somehow, they could actively work that and be an advocate for the adoptive families to go out there and match.
And what I was told during Pride training, and I don't know if you were told the same, but they take that sheet and they upload it into a computer system. And then when a child comes into care, rights are terminated, they fill out that sheet for that child, yes, no. And then if those two papers match in this algorithm, then it spits out the name. But what I have found is that there's a whole lot less of the computer being used and a whole lot more of who is staying in touch with an adoption specialist on the weekly and saying, hey, I'm still ready to adopt. I'm still ready to do this. And the call here in Pulaski County was just so good to us about Judy Booth over at the call would call us once or twice a week. Has anybody called you? No. Well, I know that this person is coming into care and they would be a great match for you. I will call the adoption specialist. And she would call, but that adoption specialist would never call us. And so when it came down to our situation with Luke, the judge had ordered him out of foster care to do legal risk adoption. But the judge ordered that both parents had to have a medical background. And so Judy said, I have the perfect couple. And so we were open for like 4 days before we got a call about Luke. And we were going, this isn't supposed to happen. They told us it could be 4 years.
This is awesome.
Yeah. And well, it was awesome. But at the same time, we're going, we're not ready. We're not ready for all of this.
Are you ever really ready though?
No, you're not ever really ready. I'm
No.
still not ready. It's just life is crazy. And so here we have this kid. And so I remember the morning after waking up and going, my entire life just changed. But for you two, it wasn't really that much of a change as much as it was more responsibility.
Yes, but I do have to point out we have a 7-year age gap between our third child and our twins. And so we were out of the baby stage for a handful of years at that point. So it was kind of for us almost starting over with 3 babies. And so we went from no babies to 3 babies in diapers overnight. And it was that first 24 hours was extremely overwhelming. But
24 hours, I'm thinking like that first year.
Yeah, I think we kind of went into survival mode. Our brains did for the first year or two. And just trying to make sure we did everything right for the kids was our main concern, getting that good attachment going, pulling them from daycare and just being at home 24/7, which can be overwhelming in itself. But, you just kind of do what you need to do to set them up for success.
Yeah. And so with your biological children, did they ever express any concern once it did happen, once now there are 3 babies in the home?
We had the first instance, actually, the day we went and picked up our sweet Charlotte, the first baby that came into our home, who was our youngest. Our son was very adamant that he did not want another girl in the house. That we had told him we were bringing a boy.
Yeah.
And, and he's the middle child on top of that, at that time. And so they were with friends, and she let me know that he was very vocal even to them. And so we go to pick up our kids on the way home after we had picked up Charlotte. And he looked at us and he said, I just want to see her. And so I opened the car door and she was sound asleep. And he just fell in love with her, I think, more than anybody. And he really did. His body, he was just like, oh, and it was just, it kind of lifted his spirits. And he kind of, I think that's when the Holy Spirit just kind of showed him, yeah, this is right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always said when it's the right thing, everything falls into place with everybody concerning, at least within the home, maybe not still family, outside family.
Yeah.
They still have their issues, but that's their issue and that's not our issue.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so were there any push from your family about, no, you probably shouldn't do this?
I mean, there was. I'll just say there was.
We definitely had a few that were very vocal.
Yeah, but in the end, we both just recognized that, hey, this was our decision. That was probably one thing I wasn't expecting, but in the end, and no, don't take that the wrong way, because 80% of our family is amazing, loves the girls, and never once would ever treat them. I mean, my father adopted us, and so there's value in that. But yeah, that was one thing we weren't expecting. But in the end, you recognize, hey, that's your problem, and you're missing out on a lot.
Absolutely.
So,
I tell people quite often to tell others, I appreciate your opinion, but understand you don't get a vote.
Yes, and we don't have to own their emotions.
Right.
Those are theirs.
Right.
You know.
In moving forward, I know how my schedule is with a 6-year-old. It's just absolutely crazy. I remember his first day of daycare at Baptist Health. Jennifer's a Baptist employee. And we walk in there, and they're giving us these forms for a fundraiser that they are doing. Their PTA at the daycare is doing a fundraiser, and he had to sell all of these Domino's Pizza savings card. And I'm going, he's 2 years old. Like,
that's for you to sell.
Yeah, I'm like, how is he going to sell those? But those kind of things just kind of struck all of a sudden. And then having to do physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy twice a week, it became very busy for us to try to make all of these appointments and to get him. And the people who did those therapies that would come to his daycare weren't always the best people for him to be seeing. And so we, would try to get private companies that were very well versed in working with problems that he had. And so you mentioned that when your children were taken into care, that there were some therapies that that they had to take. Were those things that really made it more burdensome to try to get them and get everything arranged?
Not necessarily. So we ended up pulling them from daycare after like 2 months, and I decided to just focus on them for the most part. I kind of stepped back from my photography, which I was doing full time on top of another job. And so just kind of put the focus more on them. And that really just freed up the time that I needed to get them to and from therapies, which it was really just the twins also, and occupational therapy, physical therapy. Really, we were just trying to play catch up. And then one of our twins has done some vision therapy. That's probably been the biggest headache out of everything, because there are only 3 actual certified places in Arkansas that are board certified to do vision therapy. And so Fort Smith was the closest, but they were full. We are. And
that's an hour, 20 minutes, 30 minutes?
From Fort Smith.
Yeah.
So we've been driving to Stacy, which was almost 2 hours before they completed this newer highway. So it's a lot faster now.
I was about to say, that's not closer.
No, it's not.
But they have a Chick-fil-A there that my daughters love, the indoor playground. So
yeah.
That's the highlight of the day.
Yeah, so I was driving every week with twin 3-year-olds and a 2-year-old to Cersei, almost 2 hours, sitting there for an hour for her to do vision therapy. Then we would go eat lunch and then drive almost 2 hours home. So that was probably the most inconvenient thing. I mean, I've definitely learned that sometimes the most inconvenient things are the most important things.
Absolutely.
And you just do it.
Yeah.
And it's made a big difference for her.
And the thing about it was that Stacy wouldn't tell you is she's been probably the biggest advocate for the girls. And so coming in, I mean, she's the one fighting for them, making sure they get everything they need, the medical care, just different things like that these kids, a lot of kids don't have that. So she's been really good and adamant and goes into mom mode and make sure things get done. So
yeah. Now, speaking of advocates, there's an organization called CASA, which is Court Appointed Special Advocates for Neglected and Abused Children. and it's it's a U.S. organization, so it's in all 50 states. And I'm a CASA worker. I'm not active doing it. I took a break. You can't do it while you're in an adoption foster process, and so I never just really got back into it. But a lot of people don't understand is that advocacy ends when the parental rights are terminated. They are once they are in an adoptive home, that CASA is no longer there for them. And so who is their advocate at that point? And if the workers are already overworked and underpaid, I might add, who is going to be their advocate if the adoptive home isn't?
Yeah, and let me throw something else at you. Our kids didn't have a CASA worker. They were in foster care from 9 months old, and I think our adoption was finalized right after they turned 3. I don't even know how many caseworkers they had. Yeah. Nobody knew where their birth certificates were. I mean, it was kind of a nightmare, them being in the system. They were some of those forgotten children because they had been placed with a family member.
Yeah.
So they were kind of forgotten, if we're being honest. Their ad litem, who is the attorney that represents the children in the court cases for DCFS, met them one time, and it was right before our adoption.
I was about to say, he drove up to
because
our
he
house.
had to, you know. So, I mean, we went 9 months, and nobody knew these kids but us, you know.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing about it is that these kids do slip through the cracks, and sometimes they become just a number on a page than who they actually are. And so, in retrospect, how would things have been different had there been somebody there advocating for them?
They probably would have terminated the rights sooner than they did. Our youngest child probably would have been pulled from the home sooner than she had. I think that, they maybe would have been able to be adjusted in a home faster.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people may not understand, but I'll give this scenario. A mom in a home has 2 kids, and she goes on a drug binge, and they take the kids out of the home. Mom is pregnant, but when mom delivers, there is no drugs in that baby's system. That baby goes home with her. That baby is not automatically removed from the home. And so there are times that I look at that and go, if she can't have her 2 older ones, then why can she now take this baby home?
Yes.
And so being a separate incident, there isn't that. So I assume that may be kind of what happened in your case, being that the youngest was taken at a separate time.
She was born in a different state, and different states have different rules.
Got you.
So, but yeah, when she was removed, it was considered a second case. So the twins were not on the same case as the youngest one. And so they ended up in the end combining their cases and terminating all the rights at the same time.
But that wasn't until you went to them and said, hey, shouldn't these be combined? I mean, they were still handling them as 2 separate cases throughout the process.
Yeah, which means 2 different caseworkers, 2 different ad litems in a lot of cases, 2 different attorneys for DCFS in some cases. And it just makes a big mess when you start getting these things. And also, which you mentioned, they had many different caseworkers and resource workers.
Yes.
And we saw that too. Like, we would have somebody show up at our home with a DCFS badge and say, "Oh, I'm Luke's new caseworker," and I'm going, "And you think I'm going to let you in my home because you have a badge?" Like, there should be a little bit more accountability.
Some kind of protocol.
Yeah. And then, when his CASA worker showed up to our home, it was the same thing. And had I not been familiar with what the CASA program was, I probably would not have let this lady in my home. And so there comes this point where the biggest frustration for us was the lack of communication amongst the team, and I'll air quote the team, because it almost felt like there was all of this inner workings that was taking place, and you were the last one to find out.
Yes. I drove 3.5 hours every 3 months to the court hearings, because if I didn't go, I didn't know what was going on. Also, we were told one thing, and then we found out, the caseworker really had no idea what she was talking about and had told us something that was completely opposite of what was actually going on. And so definitely a lack of communication. I mean, our adoption was postponed because of lack of things getting done at DCFS, and we eventually got the lady over DCFS in the Little Rock area involved and got our adoption, done. We're just missing paperwork constantly, that sort of thing. I agree with you on that for sure.
Did they tell you in Pride anything you send to them, make 3 copies for yourself because you'll have to send it at least 2 times more?
Yes.
We ended up getting the local state representative or state senator involved, and he was just a godsend to help us get that through. But I mean, and I know it seems, heavy on the issues with the state agencies, but those guys work so hard with so little. And I mean, they may have 30 or 40 cases, and we had to remember that. And so when they did show up, that might be their 30th visit that day. And
well, right now it's between 50 to 60 to 1, and that's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just impossible. We can have all of these ideas about how to fix the system, but each case plan is different. I mean, it literally is. And how we connected, I think, was through the Arkansas Foster Support Group. Is that how we connected?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I'm the administrator of that group. And what I found was that somebody would ask a question and they would get 14 different answers from 14 different foster homes. And the problem is that in some counties, this is okay. But in this county, that's not okay, and you're not going to do it. And for instance, and this has been several years ago, used to, if you wanted to post a picture of your family, you just had to blur out the foster child's face. Now you can't even post a picture with their body or anything in it. And I can understand the confidentiality side of that, but also that's just a whole lot of life that is missed there. And so to get all of these different ideas, and so I have to remind people often on that page is just because it was okay for this parent and that's the way they did it, doesn't mean that it's going to be okay with you. And even in our case, when Luke got a new caseworker, things were different. Things were changed. Was that an issue in your home as well?
Things changing. We didn't have a lot of communication with our caseworker. She was 3.5 hours away. So,
Gotcha.
I mean, unless I'm, calling constantly, texting, trying to get an answer to a question, I mean, we really didn't have much communication.
I think she came in maybe 3 times in that year.
Well, she actually never came to our home. So what they do, if you have a child who is in a county 3.5 hours away, they assign you what they call a secondary caseworker. So a secondary caseworker is a caseworker that lives in your county that works for your local DCFS, and they come out once a month and spend 30 minutes or so there to kind of check on the welfare of the child. Now, I think we had 1, maybe 2 people who came more than once over a year time. I mean, it was like constantly changing. So,
yeah, and ours was as silly as the new caseworker said, no, the fire escape plan can't be on the refrigerator. It has to be in this part of the home. Where the other person said, no, put it on the refrigerator. That's the easiest place. And I'm going, okay. Or the fire extinguisher had to be so many feet from the stove instead of in a central location where the other caseworker told us to be. And so it just became so overwhelming as to, okay, what is it going to be this time? You talked about getting with your state representative. I remember there was a point in our case where I got so disgusted that I called the governor's office and talked to the DCFS liaison, and I immediately got a phone call from the director. And so while I would not just advocate for people to do that if they weren't getting an answer, it works. So,
eventually you just get to that point, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Doc Bryan said, if it's not working, call your state rep.
That's right. I did. And I'll stand behind that all day. And it really doesn't matter if it's adoption or if it's Social Security, whatever the case may be, use your state representatives. That's what they are there for. Now, you also mentioned that there was some things the caseworker told you that wasn't really what was going on. Typically, when a child comes from kinship and is placed in an adoptive home, the parental rights have been terminated. But you found that that wasn't the case.
So our situation, we were actually considered another kinship placement because I was friends with her, who was part of the family.
But you had never
And
met
I knew
the
her.
children.
I'd never met the children before,
Okay.
but I was friends of the family.
Gotcha.
And so that's how we were looked at. And so they moved in with us. We actually, 5 years ago, you could call your local DCFS resource worker and say, hey, I want to switch my home from adopted to foster. She pushes a button on the computer. It's done.
Can't do that anymore.
Can't do that anymore. So that's what we were able to do at that time. And the kids moved in with us as a foster placement. However, like I said, we had a brand new caseworker. She had told us that the rights were being terminated a month after that. I go to court and realize that's not anywhere,
Yeah. So was it that the goal was still reunification?
The goal was still reunification. And so at that time is when, we had to kind of realize, okay, this is not the scenario we were told. But we said yes to God that we would take these kids in. And so let's just see where it goes. 9 months later, we're still, coming to a close with that situation where they were, coming to terminate parental rights. But, it's never an open and shut case in those circumstances. And so you were talking earlier about, how you couldn't foster because you couldn't let a kid go home. But I think at that point we had just, how can we not foster these kids? No matter the outcome, my prayer just became, God just placed them in whatever home or situation they need to be in where they learn about you. They become one of your children. They accept Jesus as their savior. Like that's the ultimate goal in life, So wherever they need to be for that to happen just became my prayer. And that's where I found my peace.
Yeah.
Not me. I'm like, they can't go home. They're with us.
Ain't nobody taking these
Nobody
babies.
taking my babies from
Yeah.
me. Yeah. So she's better than I am.
Yeah, and that's where I would have been too. But I do have to remind myself, even in counseling with foster parents, is that your goal as a foster parent is reunification. That's the
true.
whole point of foster parenting is reunification. When that goal comes from reunification into adoptive, the foster parents aren't supposed to be involved anymore. They're supposed to be moved to an adoptive home, but because of the lack of resources and the advocate being for the child and not for the parents who are looking for adoptive children, that kind of gets misplaced there. At that point, I'm sure there was a lot of anxiety on the front end of it, though, because I remember having the thought, holding this precious boy in my hands while he is sleeping, and me sitting there on the couch holding him and going, God, don't let them take him away from me. This just can't happen. This can't happen. Did you? And I know that you said you prayed and you had that resolved, but at the same time, there had to be that I don't want this to happen. And if this happens, I don't know what we're going to do, or how are our children going to be affected if they take these children away?
That was the biggest, probably one of the biggest reasons why we didn't sign up originally to foster, was we don't want to put our kids through that. We had some other close friends that did foster, and it takes a special person to be able to bring these kids in and love them, but know that there's that opportunity that, they will be reunified with their family and
love them from afar.
Yes. And so when we faced that, and when we flipped from adopt to foster so that we could bring the girls in, it was, I mean, you were fearful, and you did fear a phone call one day or what, at least I did. I don't know.
I mean, we're all still human, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing that happened in our situation was, after rights were terminated, there was a grandfather in New Mexico that called and said he wanted Luke. And that's when I learned that once parental rights are terminated, there's no longer any kinship. There is nobody who has any right or any claim to that child.
Yes.
How did they explain that to you, or did that even occur since it was a kinship placement?
I actually had some friends that kind of worked with CASA, like in the office. And so that's really where I got most of my information about things. So that's who I would call and ask questions to. And they were really able to kind of explain that to me. We did have some family members who, said that they were going to do this or do that. But, we have to remember that those family members also have to pass background checks. They have to be able to have their home, organized for a child because that child is still in foster care. So they're coming into their home still, in custody of the state. And so in the long haul, none of that worked out in their favor for that to happen. And so the kids, just ultimately stayed with us.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Which
but
is
the
good.
family members were letting known that they were good.
But our emotions were definitely toyed with, for a while, and
it's all good now.
It's all good now.
And so I guess probably the most unique thing about your story is that your adopted girl's biological mother is now a part of their life.
Yes. So she was a teen mom. And so she was very young when the twins were born. She actually spent some time in foster care herself. So it was kind of a generational, kind of thing going on. And, in my opinion, she really didn't have a chance. She didn't have a support system. She didn't have a supportive family or anything that she needed to have to be set up for success. And so it wasn't hard to have empathy, for her situation. I always, gave her tons of pictures when, I would send them to her. She didn't do visits until I don't know, I think she did 2 visits in that year. But I always made sure she got pictures because I never wanted her to worry. And in the end, when she did do a visit, she looked at me and she said, because she knew they were going to terminate rights, and she said, if you do adopt my kids, will I ever see them again? When I look at her, I see my kids. And these kids are going to grow up and they're going to have to read everything that happened on paper because it's all on paper. And they're going to have their own healing process that they have to go through as teenagers or adults or, whenever that happens. And anything that I could do to lessen that burden on them, was my goal. And so we talked and kind of gave her a scenario of if you can, get clean for a year and before they turn 4 years old or by the time they turn 4 years old, then we would love for you to be able to be a part of their life in some way, shape, or form. We didn't know what that was going to look like. There's no manual on this at all. But eventually, we kind of became a little bit of her support system for a while. And eventually she was able to do that.
I would assume, though, there had to be very clear boundaries.
We do have pretty clear boundaries. She doesn't live by us either. So she lives 3.5 hours away. And so there are probably some boundaries we didn't really have to deal with because of the circumstances and where we live. And our kids are young, so it's not like they have, cell phones or anything like that either. And so...
They're how old? And they don't have a cell phone?
No. The twins are about to turn 7, and Charlotte is 5.
I was never more embarrassed to have to explain to the AT&T guy that I was buying a new iPhone for my 3-year-old son because I was tired of him playing games on my phone.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and so, but we won't go into all that. Those are my issues, not yours. Now, that brings up, though, the interesting question, which, there really is no such thing as open adoption in the state of Arkansas unless it's pre-planned.
Yeah, not through DCFS.
Right.
It's just not possible.
Right.
So.
And so in our situation, we were not told who the parents were. And we only found that out after they brought in like the 8 bank boxes of medical records. Mm-hmm. And I began to go through them and categorize between pulmonary and cardiology. And in this report, they redacted the first name, and mm-hmm. this report, they redacted the last name. And so putting it all together, then I find out who these people are. And my wife and I really had to sit down and have the conversation about when are we going to tell him, if we're going to tell him that he's adopted. Mm-hmm. Now, it sounds like in your situation, that wasn't ever a conversation you were going to have because the biological mother could possibly be in the picture. So mm-hmm. as I'm going to ask her for a minute, and then we'll look at Dad's point of view here. But as I assume they call you Mom.
They have from day one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does it make you feel for them to understand that you're not their biological mom? Or have you gotten to that crossroads yet, even with them being as young as they are?
Oh, yeah. So we want it to be a normal conversation for them. We don't want them to feel different. We mm-hmm. don't want them to have any shame. And so we've always tried to keep it on their level as well. So as they get older, conversations will lengthen, they will change. So it's always been from the get-go. I mean, we have pictures of her holding them the days they were born. I have encouraged, on their birthdays, for her to talk to them about the day they were born. And I think it's good for her too, Mm-hmm. I want to honor her because, she was a teen mom. She could have gone and had an abortion. She could have, there are so many different, options that she had. And she chose to have these kids and to give these kids life. And she loves these kids. And so I wanted to honor her in those ways. And so we kind of just always have, you grew in her belly. That's why you look just like her. Look how beautiful you are, and, but she wasn't able to be your mom. And God chose this family for you. And we're so happy he chose this for you. We've had conversations within the last 2 months, and our 5-year-old yesterday, she thought all of our kids were adopted. She doesn't, she's just getting to some of that stuff. And she's not the only one of those 3 who thought all of our mm-hmm. kids were adopted. And I had a conversation about a month ago with one of my twins, and she said something about, being in my belly. And I said, well, don't forget, you didn't grow in my belly. And she said, oh, yeah, I forget that sometimes. And I'm like, mm-hmm. yeah, I do too. Yeah. And I know that is not the case with every adoptive mom either. I have many conversations, and I really appreciate that. I've always felt that about my kids. I really do sometimes I feel the exact same way as if I had birthed them myself.
It was that picture.
It must have been that first picture. Mm-hmm. That love at first sight. It really has been that for me. And I feel so blessed that it has been that way because I know that that's not always, the outcome.
Yeah. And so while we've not ever physically met Luke's biological parents, we know who they are and have watched over Facebook. And I, for one, can say I'm so glad that he was adopted, not just to us, but out of that lifestyle, mm-hmm. Because certainly losing a child did not change any of that. But in your case, did you ever get to a point of where you thought we probably shouldn't have given her the opportunity to be a part of her children's life?
No, not at all. I'll take that one.
Go for
it. The birth mom has just been amazing, and we've gone through this process with her. In fact, I have some family members that have been in a rehab facility. My mom had battled a 17-year drug addiction. She came out of that 14 or 15 years ago.
Almost 14 years ago.
And is still there as the assistant director, 14, 15 years later. Just amazing testimony there. And we actually were able to connect the birth mom to where my mom's at. And so my mom has her in the program and is working with her. My mom's like, I feel like it's one of my daughters.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, the birth mom came out of that. She met all the stuff that we had laid out. And she's about to get married. She's in college now. She has a child of her own that, is over a
He
year.
just turned 2.
Yeah, just turned 2.
Mhm.
And so we could not be prouder of the birth mom and getting to watch her come out of this. It's been amazing, but that's her story. But yeah, we've never once felt like we shouldn't have done what we did. We felt like that was the Lord throughout it.
Yeah, we've always wanted, she got clean and sober. She got saved. She's living, a life with God and walking with Jesus. And I've always wanted that for my kids, to be able to know her as that new person and grow up knowing her as who she is now before they have to read about who she was in the past.
Right. Yeah. And that's also kind of the scary part of, okay, when they grow up and they do read this, are they going to look at her in a different light that is a negative light? But in your situation, you are preparing them to see all of the good as opposed to all of the bad.
Isn't that what we all want to look for, though? Look for the good.
I don't know that that's what we all want to look for, but yes, that's what we should be looking for in these instances. But with most situations, I would say there probably wouldn't be that much grace that would be extended to a biological mother who had rights terminated. Had it not been for you being adopted, had it not been for your mother having substance abuse issues, it was all of those things that culminated together for you to want to give her a chance, for you to and so, when it boils all the way down, it was all, as believers, we know it was all preordained. God knew all of this was going to happen, and he prepared our hearts for it. But at a point in time in raising them, have you ever worried that they may resent their mother because she didn't fight for them and because she didn't get clean to take care of them?
I don't know.
I wouldn't think so. They love her the way we've always, or I guess because it is constantly changing, but the way it's kind of been explained is, she just wasn't able to care for you. She wasn't able to take care of you the way that you needed to be. And so I don't think there would ever be that resentment.
I know there will definitely be healing that needs to take place.
Yeah, for sure.
And that there will, be some type of grieving process, to get there.
But it'll be a lot easier, though, given the fact that this is somebody that has been to our house for Easter and does come to birthday parties. And so, but she's a part of their life, but they're not a part of her life. Is that how you would explain it?
Mm-hmm. We've been trying to figure this out along the way, like how to keep those boundaries, what that means.
So in other words, that would, for example, she could come to your house for Easter, but it's not like they're going to her house for her birthday or for their birthdays.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which I think is a very clear boundary and very necessary boundary. What has there, and there may not have been, but what interaction has there been between the children and the biological mother that really just made you say, we might not want to consider this?
I don't know that there's really been any.
Yeah, not necessarily for Stacy. For me, there's still that protective dad type deal, and so when they are together, we're all together, and so it's never. And it's not because we don't trust anybody. Somebody wouldn't be in my home if I didn't trust them.
Right.
But just as a father, you're just always watching and listening and just trying to be protective. But there's never been anything where we flinched and been like, yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And she's never pushed back on. Stacy and her have always had a wonderful relationship, and they talk pretty regularly and text and communicate. So she's never pushed back really on any of the boundaries
She's
that
amazing.
Stacy's put.
Like,
Yeah,
seriously
she's amazing.
amazing. I mean, she really does love these girls, you know.
Yeah, and so as I said, this is just a wonderful portrait of grace that you are able to have on her and that God has on us, and providing the things that we want to children that have the need. And so I remember, and as you have said, I remember being in that stage between being open and not having a child, and then that stage of getting a child and the adoption taking so long, and for the termination of rights to go on so long. What would your words to someone who is in that position, what would your words of encouragement be to them?
First of all, it's okay to have breakdowns. It's okay to be human. And just stay the course and just trust the outcome. I mean, honestly, I don't know how people who don't have, you know, that relationship with Christ would be able to walk through this and still have such a positive outlook in the end, whether it's a good outcome or bad. Because, I mean, nobody walks through this unscathed. Everyone's forever changed. But I would definitely just, you know, encourage them, you know, make sure you're relying on God and not the people around you.
Yeah, and I would agree. It is okay to have a breakdown.
For sure.
It is okay to have a breakdown. And I can remember on the days of where they would be going to court over an appeal, and the caseworker would call me that morning and say, "Hey, we're going to court today. We're fighting an appeal." And then at 6:30, you still hadn't heard anything from the caseworker who called you just this morning to tell you that this was taking place. And in our case, we couldn't go.
You can't go to the appeals. Yeah.
And so then it's 4 or 5 days later, we hear back from the caseworker, and she says, "Oh, well, nothing happened. There was a continuance." And I'm going, "Well, thanks for letting me stress about this, you know, for the last 72 hours. And so I think a word of encouragement to these others that are facing that is, while it shouldn't be normal, it is normal.
Definitely. And learning to give up things that you don't have control over. I think it taught me a lot as far as that goes, is, you know, realizing the lack of control we actually have, you know.
Not just over fostering or adopting, but the lack of control that we have over our life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everything you're gonna mess up. There's gonna you're not gonna do it perfect, and there's gonna be days that you get to the end of it and be like, "Yeah, I messed up today," or "That wasn't a good day," but it's everybody.
Yeah. And you know, I think that more so now we're living in a generation where people know that it's okay to not be okay. My infamous quote is, "However you feel, it's okay to feel that way because God made you to have those feelings. We have those feelings. Just don't unpack and live there." And so we are becoming more, I think, in this generation, aware that it's okay to express those feelings and those emotions. You know, when my son gets mad, my wife may say something to the effect of, "Well, you just need to calm down. You need to do that." And I'm going, let him be mad. You know, let him, as long as everything is safe, you know, he's not trying to hurt anybody or himself, let him be mad until he's not mad anymore. And I know the generation I grew up in, if you got mad, well, you better not say anything about it because you was going to be even more mad when you got the punishment for being mad. And so I think it's important for us to let our kids know, whether they're biological or whether they're adopted, that it's okay to own to a mess up. It's okay to know that I'm not going to do everything right. But I think it's equally important for them to see that in us as parents too, that we own that as well.
And we try to, Stacy's got a pretty big following as far as social media. And we had a hashtag through it all of Howell Party of 8, and people still joke around about that with us. But the biggest thing is don't compare your normal everyday to somebody's selfie, because most of the times what you see on social media are, you know, somebody's selfie moment, and that's them capturing, you know, that perfect moment that they probably took 5 different pictures just to get that one to post.
You mean 50 different pictures?
Yeah, 50 different pictures. And so don't compare your normal to that. And so we joke around, and a lot of times I'll talk about dad fails, and because it happens. And so definitely don't compare your normal to somebody's selfie moment.
Yeah. And not just with foster adopt, with anything.
With anything.
Yes.
I tell my teenager all the time, quit trying to be good enough. You're never, ever going to be good enough. That's why we have Jesus.
Mm.
If we could be good enough at anything, we wouldn't need him,
Yeah.
So
if someone were considering to adopt, where would you tell them to start?
Church. Pray.
I would say definitely check in with your county. If you're in Arkansas, see if they have a call. It's usually faster to do your classes that you have to complete through the call. I know in Russellville area, our DCFS, well, last year anyway, they were sending everyone to Conway DCFS to do pride classes. They're not even offering them, or they haven't been, unless that's changed, in our own county. So, and that's hard for people to drive, 45 minutes.
Sure.
And then sit through classes on a weeknight, and then drive back, especially if they have kids, in their home already. So I would say check with the call. You do have to have a church home if you go through them, but I know they're still doing, classes.
Yeah, and with the call, you can do all of your classes in 2 weekends.
In 2 weekends with an extra weekend open in between, and they usually provide and sometimes even cover, depending on what county you're in, your CPR classes.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's the call in Arkansas.org.
Okay.
And we're the only state who has a program like that.
Yeah. And we'll, of course, put that in the description of this podcast. But I also want to note, while the call is 2 weekends to finish it, going through DCFS is a class, 2 classes a week for like 7 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's 7 weeks.
In the nighttime. And the other thing about the call is typically when you do have pride class, if you have children, they will provide childcare at whatever church that they're doing their training at. And so there are a lot of different things that just make it better. And in the end, I felt like I had a better advocate with the call than I would have just been a number on a page going through
And that's
DCFS.
great to hear. Every county is different.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say you're in a great county for that.
Yeah. They always call me wanting a check, but they always answer my call. Yeah.
That's right. And then be sure and include, I know you will, but Project Zero is amazing. And they have the Heart Gallery.
Well, you have to be an open home to inquire about any of the children. So all of your paperwork and all of that has to be completed.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you're considering adopting, go to the Arkansas Heart Gallery and look at some of the children.
Oh, my gosh.
Mm-hmm. Just about all of them have a video now of where they talk. I watched one the other day where this boy was like 8 or 9 years old. And they said, what do you want in a family who adopts you? And his answer was, to know that I'm not going to be killed. And it just broke my heart, to think that a child that age has to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so othen I think sometimes we become blind to the problems that other people have.
Absolutely.
And other people become numbers on our page instead of at other places. So
I know they had the Heart Gallery traveled around for a bit too, and we were able to put that up in our church, and it's real touching, and just to get to see that. And she spent a lot of time on the website, reading the stories and looking at bios and prior to.
The only problem with that is you fall in love with that kid to find out that they may be in a trial placement home, or, and then you're going, oh, but they were so cute and their personality was just, like I said, we were fortunate but unfortunate that we didn't see a picture of Luke before. And, to tell the rest of the story, we picked him up at a liquor store, not at a Starbucks or a Chick-fil-A. So
I guess you can't go there to celebrate every year like we do.
Don't take him to the...
Yeah.
But one thing I would say, just to draw attention to, that I think does get missed, is I've talked to a couple of social workers that they talk about most of them are second and third generation. So the child will leave once they hit 18, they're no longer in the system. And then usually it's about 4 to 5 years and that child reappears as a parent. And so something that where I feel like Arkansas really lacks is those programs for these kids graduating out of foster care. Because once you're there, and there's so many tools for these kids, to get education, but there's really just a lack of manpower that can walk through it with them. And so,
yes. And something else that was brought to my attention is that, once they hit a certain age and they're still in foster care, then the state will pay for them to go to a 4-year institution in the state. But what they will not cover is a trade school. And a lot of these kids that have such a traumatic background, especially if they've grown up in foster care to an adult age, they struggle academically, most of them, because they have so much trauma that it's hard for them to focus on academics. And so they could really benefit from a trade school where they couldn't, on the other hand, they couldn't spend 4 years at a 4-year institution and be able to stay focused that long.
Right. Yeah. And personally, and you're looking at somebody with a PhD, but college is overrated. I mean, it really is overrated. And it's not for everybody,
No.
And at least when I was growing up, it was everything you did in high school was pointed towards college. And
it's worse now.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, it was good having you both here with us. If someone from our podcast that listens wants to contact you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
We are, like you said, we do have a pretty big following on Facebook, actually. My name on Facebook is Stacy Morgan Howell. And
or the website, either one, davidjhowell.com.
Okay. Can you spell that for us?
Yeah, DavidJHowell.com.
All right. And of course, we'll put all of this at the end of in the description of a podcast here. So if you're in Arkansas and you're looking to adopt or foster, I would strongly encourage you to get with the Call of Arkansas, which is a faith-based adoption coalition agency here in our state. And just on behalf of us here that have adopted, we want to say thank you to the foster parents.
Yes.
For their job and their part, and thank you to the adoptive parents who have found it in their heart to be able to do that. But also a thank you to the social workers that are seeing these kids in these homes and this traumatic events that they are going through,
and trying to find them a safe place to sleep.
Yes. All right. Well, I've been Doc Brian. This has been Doc Talks. You can find me at thedocbrian.com. All of my social media links are at the bottom of that webpage. And come follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of those social media platforms that I know nothing about. Feel free to follow us there. Of course, Doc Talks is a part of Be Frank Network. You can find all of our podcasts at BeFrankNetwork.com. David, Stacy, once again, thank you so much for sharing your story and being with us today.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. We will talk to you next time. Have a great day.